Hello, everyone, and welcome to Conversations in Lung Cancer Research, a podcast of the Thoracic Oncology Group of Australasia, or TOGA, known to many of you. My name is Mel Moore. I'm a medical oncologist at St Vincent's in Melbourne, and it's my pleasure to be chairing and having this conversation today. Before we get going, on behalf of TOGA, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we live and work. TOGA pays their respect to their elders, past, present and emerging, and we also extend that respect to all Indigenous people. In today's episode, I'm delighted to be joined by Associate Professor Bryan Chan. Bryan is a senior medical oncologist at the Adam Crosbie Cancer Centre, as well as at the Sunshine Coast University Private Hospital. After completing his physician's training and oncology fellowship, he undertook a clinical research fellowship at the Princess Margaret Cancer Centre in Toronto, Canada. And at that time, he was also the Chief Oncology Fellow. And we'll talk to him a little bit more about that. He's an associate professor at Griffith University and also the University of the Sunshine Coast, and an adjunct associate professor with the University of Queensland. His clinical interests are in managing thoracic malignancies, with research interests in health service and quality. And last but not least, he's also the convener of this year's TOGA Annual Scientific Meeting. So I hope there's lots of you that are listening that are attending that. And we'll speak to him a bit about that experience as well throughout the podcast. So Bryan, great to welcome you to the Conversations in Lung Cancer Research podcast.
And thanks, Mel, for that very kind introduction. And I also just want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that I'm coming from, which are the Gubbi Gubbi and Jinnabara people. And I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Bryan. Bryan, I've mentioned this in your bio, obviously, but just going to take you a little way back to your fellowship. Now, we know that Princess Margaret in Toronto is a well-worn path for many of our seniors and people that have come after us as well. Just wanted to start by asking what attracted you and what prompted you, firstly, to do a fellowship in the first place, and what particularly was it about Princess Margaret that attracted you?
Sure. I mean, I think for many of us who are trainees, or for me certainly, it wasn't exactly clear what would happen after I finished my training. And so I guess it was a sliding doors moment when a lot of us come to crossroads. And really, some people might have the answer themselves, but I think for many of us, we rely on wise mentors and people like that. And so one of those people for me was Zani Lewin, who I think needs no introduction here to the TOGA family. But Zani mentioned to me the possibility of a fellowship, the means of how to do a fellowship, and really introduced me, I guess, to the mentors who would then become my supervisors during my time there. As you also mentioned, it is a relatively well-worn path, particularly from some of our seniors here in Queensland. We've had a long-standing relationship with the Princess Margaret Cancer Centre in terms of sending fellows from Australia, with some of them even staying on for longer periods. So definitely something that wasn't in my mind as a junior trainee, but certainly a very good piece of advice from a wise mentor.
And I guess, what do you see as the benefits to an overseas fellowship? It's a question that I get often from registrars deciding what to do in the future. I didn't do an overseas fellowship, but I know that people that do speak very highly of it.
Yeah, and I guess from my point of view, honestly, I think one of the main things that you take away is when you're a junior reading all these papers and you're seeing these, what I call international superstar oncologists and people who are producing all this research. And when you go to these fellowships, you work for people like that, and you realize these are, simple people just like us who have the same issues, concerns. And so realistically, it's breaking down those barriers, allowing registrars and trainees to really get to know people on a personal level. And I think relationships and collaborations is probably how I would put some of the key benefits to it. So, for example, I had never worked in a center purely dedicated to cancer. So there's multiple, I think it's over 18 floors of pure cancer care involving not only a vast number of medical oncologists, hematologists, and radiation and palliative care physicians all under the one roof, but it's also about being, I guess, at the true cutting edge of research as it's being conducted and creating the next wave of evidence to lead where things go in oncology. I think it's no doubt that clinical trials are a large part of things in major cancer centers. And I think the other thing I got a lot of exposure to was not only running, and the day-to-day investigator responsibilities for running clinical trials, but under a trainee program where you can be supervised by people who are very experienced at doing that. And as I mentioned before with relationships, I mean, I think I was very lucky. It was prior to the pandemic. And so we were able to have, on average, about 60 or 65 international fellows at once. And as you mentioned, I was lucky enough to be the chief fellow in my second year there, which means that I got to provide a lot of advocacy for people from all over the world and also help them navigate different collaborations with other researchers and clinicians. And I'm glad to say that a lot of those have endured in terms of lifelong friendships now.
Brian, I think it's a really good point you make about the superstars of oncology and people that when you're junior, I think you could almost be a bit intimidated by, but you're absolutely right. The reality are these people are normal people, and I think no one in that position should feel intimidated or afraid of sending an email, making a phone call, going up to someone at a conference, because certainly my experience, I'm sure yours has been, that everyone is very collegial and willing and happy to provide advice and provide mentorship. So I think that's a really good point to get across. And I'd imagine you must have people all around the world that you can pop in and see on your travels for whatever reason.
Absolutely. All around the world, I have a couch to sleep on if I need.
Fantastic. And then just wanted to take you to when you were looking at coming back to Australia. You obviously thought, right, I'm coming back home to work. How did that transition work? And did you come back with a job ready to go, or you came back in a bit of limbo and had to see what was available?
Well, I guess something that I personally had a fear of was people are going to forget you when you're away. But I found that's the absolute opposite. In fact, when you do go overseas and you do go to the large meetings, back when we could travel, you would see consultants from Australia and you'd check in and say, how are things going with jobs, etc. And I found, obviously no one walks into a job anymore, but I found the process was quite not easy, but in terms of people made me aware of opportunities that were coming. And I guess the fellowship itself allowed me to have the necessary skills and I think also the frameworks for how I could set up. And there's so many skills that you learn from these very experienced people, from soft skills such as writing your CV, learning how to perform well in interviews and things like that. And these are skills that are not easily taught in any program, but something you can certainly gain experience from lots of experienced people. So when I did come home, I was very lucky because at the time it was to a full-time job, and that's how I ended up here on the Sunshine Coast.
And it sounds like, Brian, you've got a mix of a public and a private appointment. Do you like that balance, and how do you balance that?
Yeah, absolutely. So many people, including myself, were very scared of doing private upfront, so I didn't do it initially. I must say I worked in public practice for about 4 years before finally deciding. It was actually quite fortuitous. I was invited to join the private group and I thought, okay, well, if not now, when? So I dabbled and still only do a very minor proportion of my time in the private sector. But I do find there are definite pros and cons of both systems. What I guess I take away is understanding and appreciating the differences so that you can have a much more holistic approach and seeing problems from different angles. So, for example, if there are inefficiencies that you might see in one system, there are certain things that you might draw on from a more efficient model and see if you can implement them to improve practice. Because I guess that's another major part of what I love to do. And it's not always recognized as research here in Australia. And certainly in Canada, there were people with job titles like clinician quality, clinician scientist, clinician researcher. So there were different models. And clinician quality was a model where, as a clinician, you were valued for your input in improving systems, improving inefficiencies, and basically health service and quality research. So once I came back to Australia, and certainly in my site, this was an area of need. And so one of the first things I did was create our local oncology quality meeting and committee, which then means you have to be the chair. But it's also a sneaky way of identifying issues that are problematic and then basically getting what you want out of it. Because when you do that, it's all above board. It is with the hat of safety and quality. And I would encourage young trainees who, don't necessarily get the jobs in the major centers in Australia to think about moving to regional centers. There are, I think, more opportunities there. And you just have to think outside the box about how you make yourself valuable to the team.
That's a fantastic point, Bryan. How was that? So obviously you've initiated this quality committee. How was that received both within the department and at a hospital level as well? Did you face any barriers or, I guess, pushback for that?
Initially, yes, because it is yet another meeting for already busy clinicians. But I think, you have to be emphatic in what you believe in. And so despite the challenges, I pushed on with that. And I think our director at the time had the foresight to acknowledge that this is an area of need, accepted that we needed it, and encouraged people to come along. So as with everything, strong leadership and encouragement is important. In terms of executives, etc., I think it was a no-brainer in terms of patient safety and quality improvement. And in fact, now with the National Safety and Quality Health Standards, it's a mandatory part of our practice. So it was nice that we had this all set up before accreditation arrived.
You're ahead of your time, Bryan. And so you mentioned that in overseas departments that this sort of work would be an area of research. Have you been able to publish any of the work out of this committee and make it a research area as well?
Unfortunately, we have made some local improvements and things like that, but in terms of publishability, it's not been something that has been easily transferred into publications. But also, in terms of the universities locally, I don't think it is still an area that is necessarily recognized as a traditional form of research.
Yeah, hopefully that changes because it's obviously a very important area in addition to our clinical work and traditional research. Bryan, you're also the lead for thoracic oncology at Sunshine Coast University Hospital. How long have you been in that position? Is that a new position? How have you shaped that, and what does a typical week look like for you?
Yes, I've been in this position for several years now. And in terms of what it is, it's trying to ensure that we lead the team of multidisciplinary professionals. So that's everyone from our administration officers who help with our MDT meeting, our nurses, and a shout out for International Nurses Day this week to all our lovely nurses that help us. Our research nurses that attend our meetings as well, radiologists, respiratory radiation, everyone is involved with anyone in thoracic cancer. And one of the things that I think we're particularly passionate about is about continuing education. And so we've been very lucky that about 4 or 5 years ago now, just after the pandemic, we established a multidisciplinary quarterly meeting between all of us. And it is a dinner meeting sponsored where we can have open discussions about anything. So we often invite speakers from various disciplines to come and talk. But especially with the rapidly evolving field that is thoracic oncology, that makes sure that we all keep on top of things. In addition to that, it's about, I'm passionate about clinical trials, and particularly for people from a regional area. And we also cover rural regions, so regional and rural patients, to prevent them from having to drive or travel up to, 5-6 hours to go to Brisbane and back for clinical trials. So we're a strong advocate of TOGA trials. But in addition to that, we have a combination with industry trials to allow patients to access cutting-edge therapies locally. And again, with all the changes that are happening with early-stage lung cancer, we've been very lucky and fortunate to have both neoadjuvant and perioperative trials. So I'm hoping to, again, allowing patients access to therapies before PBS.
And is that something that you've helped build up Bryan, and your time in that role?
Yeah. So when I first started, clinical trials were very small. In fact, I think there was only one thoracic oncology trial and it's just nothing against anyone who was already here. It's just that I think people's focus were on other tumor streams. And so again, you see an area of need, and then you think, okay, well, what can we do? And one of the good pieces of advice from one of my mentors in Toronto, Natasha Lale, who again needs no introduction to our group here, gave me advice about ensuring that early on when you're trying to build a trial unit, to develop the framework and the skills necessary, is, as you know, industry trials have very robust protocols with strict regulations. And so that one of the first things we did, or I did when I came home, was to partner with industry and bring trials here, help train our research nurses and study coordinators, so that I think now we have a pretty good reputation amongst CROs and CRAs, and one which I'm very proud of.
And Bryan, just in terms of if there's people listening that are perhaps in a similar situation of wanting to set up a clinical trials unit or develop a clinical trials unit, when you say partnering with industry, practically, what did that mean for you in terms of developing those relationships?
Yeah, so I think, again, human beings are very relationship-based. And so I think reaching out to various companies that have the clinical trials. And to begin with, I started off with just one. And I think we did it very well. And then your reputation spreads, and then you get more invitations. And I think now that we have a lot of people asking us to be sites, and particularly with only a small number of sites in Australia that are hosting it, again, very proud that we can be part of that. And patients love that. They understand that, these treatments are not available at every location, but they're happy that they can access it even in our rural sites. So new studies to our health service, we try and have it as a blanket across all 3 sites, to ensure that the most vulnerable patients who have to travel the longest distances are not disadvantaged.
And is there a teletrial element there, Bryan, or are there oncologists in those rural sites that are seeing those patients?
So it's us. We also do outreach, and both via telehealth and in person. But I do think we have a long way to go to making industry come on board with teletrials, like the dream that SABE has for the teletrial network.
Yes, it feels like Queensland, through SABE's work, is a leader in Australia in teletrials. But that's interesting to hear you say that pharma still are not quite there with embracing it, which is a shame, because I think it's massive opportunities in a country as large as Australia, but also massive equity advantages as well.
Yeah. Well, again, you mentioned SABE as well, and I actually worked with SABE in my first year advanced training. So there's a reason why I'm pro telehealth and teletrials.
So, Bryan, you've already alluded to this a little bit in terms of coming back to Australia, and you used the term you were afraid you were going to be forgotten. When you're junior and you're trying to, I guess, get yourself known and get your mug out there, I suppose, to use a colloquialism, what advice would you have for advanced trainees, junior consultants that are feeling like they're one in a lot of different people, a lot of different advanced trainees, and hoping to stand out and develop a profile?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, but I say this to our registrars regularly, that I think every day is an interview. And so that's to make sure you're on your A game. And not everyone has good days every day, but on the whole, your entire training period, and in Queensland, we generally do 3 clinical years before you're allowed to move on to fellowships. But, to use all those opportunities to go and talk to the consultants, help them understand where you're interested in. And if you're not sure, again, getting sage advice from senior colleagues. And I think don't be afraid to go outside of the major centres. I live just over an hour from Brisbane, but I think there's definitely different opportunities outside the major metropolitan centres. And in terms of getting yourself out there, look, it is scary at the beginning, and even now, everyone has imposter syndrome, I believe, and I don't think I've met anyone that doesn't suffer from this. But you do have to say yes to things. So when invited, rather than think of reasons why you might not be the best person to take the challenge and say, okay, how can I best do this? And if you fail, well, you fail. Just try again harder next time. But I do think, especially in the beginning, it is about accepting challenges and rising to them.
I think that's great advice. I think I agree. We all have an element of imposter syndrome, and you do feel like, well, there's someone better than me to give that talk or to be on that podcast, for example. But I think that's an important bit of advice for junior people. And I actually spoke to Wendy Cooper recently, pathologist in Sydney, on this same forum, and she said a similar piece of advice about, before the age of 40 or of some nominal number, say yes to everything. And then at some point there's a transition where you start being a bit more selective, but have the confidence that you can do it and just say yes, and things will happen. But I like what you said about every day is an interview. I say to people that if you've got two people sitting in front of you with similar CVs, it's the person that's a good team player, that turns up, gets on with people, helps out, is the person that sticks in your mind as a potential future colleague.
Well, we spend so much time at work, all of us, and sometimes, you might see work colleagues more than family sometimes. And so I think it becomes our second family.
Absolutely. Bryan, as I mentioned at the outset, you are the convener of this year's TOGA ASM. Congratulations on that. That must be a nice thing. It's being held in Brisbane as well, so even better, in your home state. How has that experience been for you? And are there any sort of sneak peeks of what listeners can expect who are attending the ASM?
Yeah, obviously a great honour to be invited to convene TOGA. And I think, first of all, I welcome all our listeners to try and make it there. Who doesn't want to come to the future Olympic city? Fabulous restaurants, great weather, and great people. In terms of the program, I'm really excited. We've got some, first of all, this is a program that's been worked on by a fabulous local organising committee, very multidisciplinary, where our goal was really to ensure that there's something for everyone. So be it nurse, researcher, clinician, and all different types of clinicians, we want something for everyone there. So on the first day, on the Thursday, we have Solange Peters from Lausanne in Switzerland, who again needs very little introduction to our audience, but she's speaking to us about much needed advances in small cell lung cancer. We have our local Ken O'Byrne expert who's going to talk about molecular biomarkers. And then pivoting on day one to non-small cell lung cancer, we're going to be talking about the upcoming lung cancer screening and making sure there's equity of that. And very exciting as a medical oncologist, the idea of robotic bronchoscopy. We've got our international speaker, Calvin Lau, a thoracic surgeon from St. Bart's in London. And then to finish off day one, translational speed dating. So again, your opportunity to come and build relationships and network with basic science researchers and other clinicians as well. And then on day two, I hope you remember, you're chairing the breakfast symposium on HER2 lung cancer.
I'll be there.
For those of you who will be there, Wendy Cooper will be talking about genomic testing guidelines, which are new. And then we've got more robotic bronchoscopy interventions. We also have another international speaker, Yu Yang Soon from National University Singapore, who's going to be talking about the controversial role of radiotherapy in resectable non-small cell lung cancer. And finally, we've got Nick Pavlakis talking about oncogene-driven cancers. For our other colleagues, nursing colleagues, we have the new McGrath models of care, survivorship for advanced cancer. So in addition to our previous guideline for those with early cancer, we now have Nick Hart's going to be updating us on the MASK guidelines for advanced cancer, which I think is so important, particularly for thoracic oncology. So yes, come along.
It sounds like an amazing program. And look, I guess both of us are biased, but for anyone who hasn't been, and I work across a number of cancers, the lung cancer community and the TOGA community is very collegial. It's a lot of fun. It's a great opportunity to meet colleagues face to face in the tea breaks and the meal breaks and have a chat and make those links in terms of research, like you said, or mentorship, advice about research and what you want to do after you finish training. Or I can highly encourage everyone to come along. And yeah, it's been great having you as a convener, Bryan, and really looking forward to seeing what comes out of it and looking forward to being up there.
Thanks. Yes, I echo those comments. I also do upper GI and neuroendocrine, but I agree that the lung cancer community is quite tight-knit, very collegial, very friendly. And of all the meetings, I think TOGA is one of my favorite ones to attend each year. It's not a very large meeting, so it's an opportunity for you to really, particularly for young players, trainees, etc., to come and showcase your research. Or if it doesn't have to be research, you can just come and meet, different people from all different backgrounds and either collaborate, network, whatever it is. We're all there for the same thing, which is we all have a passion to improve outcomes for people affected by lung cancer. And so, we do that together.
Yeah, well said, Bryan. Bryan, that brings us to the end of our podcast. It's been a real pleasure talking to you today. I appreciate the imposter syndrome feeling, but absolutely non-justified in your case. I think anyone listening this will find your advice and what you've said today very inspiring. You're clearly very passionate about what you do, and it's been very insightful, and I really enjoyed our chat. So thank you again.
My pleasure, Mel, and thank you to you and TOGA for inviting me.
And as always, thank you to everyone for listening to TOGA's Conversations in Lung Cancer Research. If you enjoyed our show, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you happen to be listening to this podcast. And I look forward to you joining us for our next Conversations in Lung Cancer Research podcast.